I came to the sisters actually through a compromise with my mother. She wanted me to go to kind of what I would call a snob hill, and I didn't want to go there, but I wanted to go to the co-ed diocesan school. So my brother was dating a girl from Mother Cabrini High School at that time, so that was our compromise. We put that down, and that's where I wound up going. And thank God. I think during that time, there were many of the sisters that stood out. But some of the people that stood out the most to me, one of the sisters later went to Africa, but Sister Speranza at that time was the cook at the high school. And I remember that when I was going through my years, I love science, so I was a part of the Future Scientist of America. And so I would go up there on the weekend, especially after Sister Patricia Spillane came to the high school and taught science. And she was really magical, though I heard she really loved English much more. But I wound up majoring in science very much because of her. But on a Saturday when I would go up, usually one of the sisters opened the door, and usually it was Sister Speranza. And it was great because one of the things she always, she'd say, "Hello, Diane, did you eat?" And I think that was very symbolic of everything that happened, with our sisters, the Italian warmth that we received. It just stood out that there was not only the nurturing of the body, but there was a lot of nurturing of us as people. In our growing up, we were just teenagers during those times. So I think that was one of the hallmark. It's almost as if Sister Speranza's one sentence, "Did you eat?" just was very symbolic for many of the sisters, whether they taught or whether they were people that did the laundry or whether they were the superior. So, and that went on through pretty much my religious life, especially my early formative years. I think frequently were from the sisters that had so much wisdom. They were older, they walked in the kitchen. When we would come home from school, we had stories that they wanted to hear, and they had time to listen. So, usually they would get us cookies or milk or something, but also we had the chance to tell the stories, and that happened especially during my teaching years in many, many different localities. So that was one really great feature.
And so you've met the sisters. You're attracted. Where's the why? Where's the why?
The why, like I said before, with the why was the amount of nurturing that all of the sisters did, the interest they had in us as people. I think the teaching quality there was also very high, and most of our teachers were sisters then. So the extracurricular activities were also great. So there were many things to keep us there outside of the time. And as I had mentioned once before, was that science was one of the things that I really loved. And with Mother Patricia then, it was the Future Scientist of America. And it really influenced the courses I took. So much so I had taught, I guess, about 8 to 10 years, and then our provincial, Mother Innocent, decided that the laboratory didn't have a sister. So Diane loved science, so why don't we bring her into the lab? Of course, I think I'm one of the few people that has electives of organic chemistry and biochemistry as instead of art and music, which I think I would have loved to have taken, but it was great.
So now you're in formation.
Uh-huh.
At that time, what did you understand of the charism?
I think love of the Sacred Heart was always the center. And it was one of the reasons that I entered our congregation also, was because of the Sacred Heart. In many Irish families, there's a picture, especially in Ireland, there was a picture of the Sacred Heart of the Blessed Mother and then John F. Kennedy. So that was always center in our family, and that also really, drew me along into that.
Okay, now in your life, in your religious life, how do you perceive the charism? Is it any different? Is there more? Is there?
I feel it's really, things will change a little bit through Passway, but the primary point of always discerning what God wants for you, all the time is there a need? So we're thinking just not of our own selves, we're thinking of the Institute, and we're thinking very, very much of, what God's will for us is. And our background has been, very much Jesuit in terms of discernment of spirits, etc. So that's really part of our bloodstream. So I think that's very, very clear. There was an Italian word that we learned a while ago. It was called disponibilità, to be just totally, at disposal. And that word was in our Constitution, and it's really important because you're constantly discerning what is going on for you. So that was pretty amazing.
And for you, it's very interesting where God has taken you, has led you.
Yes.
Could you tell me about that?
Let me just start off by saying that when I was growing up, my roommate, and actually we shared the same double bed, my Aunt Cookie, was a polio victim and quite severely involved. So when she took her long braces off at night, I was her legs from the time I was very little. But I think that was also in our family. I guess we were just nurturers also, and being able to, just see what the needs of other were. And where's God taking me? Well, God took me fairly early. When I was growing up, my best friend next door was deaf. And so when she started learning sign language, we were 3 when she started going to Lexington School for the Deaf. And I learned to sign fluently. And that was a great gift in my life. And one of our provincials, Sister Bernadette Casciano, who's at Dobbs Ferry now, she was provincial then. And we took a look because I had an illness, and what I did was I started volunteering in the parish and started helping out with the deaf program from one of the public schools on 23rd Street, PS 47 for the deaf. And so she said to me, do you want to do that? Do you want to go for this? And I said, I'd really like to continue working that way. So actually, at a wine and cheese party, I met a deaf man, and he was actually the head of the deafness department at NYU. And he told me that his daughter was making fun of other children with disabilities. She was deaf, but she lived in a deaf environment where everyone signed, so she didn't feel any form of disability in that particular context, and sometimes would make fun of others. So he asked me if I would come down to the house and actually work with her. And so we did all kinds of storytelling and things like that. But the long and short of it is, there was a scholarship, a fellowship that was offered through NYU, through the government, to have someone interpret for the deaf professors. And when I was having dinner with them one night, he just said to me, Diane, do you want to do this? Do you want to go for your master's? So I went and I called, I think it was Barbara Leonardo at that time, and she said to me, Diane, look, Sister Veronica Pacone, I think, was provincial, and she was somewhere. She goes, we never, ever refuse fellowships for, a ministry that someone is really, that really we think is within, within our charism. And so that was the sisters being able to be flexible too. But I was just over the moon because this was, even opened for me, first by the provincial, and then second, with that great fellowship. I went through school getting to know the professors very well. All were deaf. And so that started me on my on my path in deafness. And during that time, I had many great experiences, and one of the really highlights was I interpreted for Dom Helder Câmara, who was a great cardinal from Brazil, who was very much, against the double standard in the church with the poor and those that were serving the wealthy, and I actually had the opportunity to interpret for them. But the thing that was so wonderful, and this is indicative of our sisters, was when I looked up and out into the audience, and there was almost 1,000 people because it was the keynote address. In the first 2 rows, there were our sisters just sitting there, being so supportive. And I mean, that's true in so many things. Our sisters support of one another. So on the way down the stairs, I remember Mother saying to me, "You must go to Villa Amelia in Argentina because there's really poor people there." Well, I thought, okay, but I kind of put in a jab for Guatemala. I went to a very, very poor villa there, and it was really, really wonderful. It was mostly the Guarani, nation that was there, and I learned a lot. But then I went to, Our Lay Assembly in Argentina, and that was a challenge because I had been in the Dominican Republic working. And so my Spanish was pretty Caribbean, and then also being in the Heights is pretty Caribbean between Puerto Rico and especially Dominican Republic. And I had been in Dominican Republic for a while. But then I went to Argentina, and the Spanish was like day and night. The accents and the way that Spanish was spoken. But so I was there a week, and I wound up going to the assembly for the laity. There was a group there that reminds me very much of our Spirit of New Orleans high school. It was always just very jolly and warm. And the people from Rosario and Santa Fe, which was more of a province, about 5 hours outside of the capital. And they were just incredible. So I got to know a little bit about them. We just hit it off. We just had lots of fun together. And I wound up they had a school for children with disabilities from infancy all the way up to 21 years old. Santa Maria. It was one of the highlights of my life. Some of the pictures that I have with me are actually from that time. It was probably my second most wonderful community experience in my entire life. The warmth that was there, but I had an ability to actually work in my own field in one of our institutions. So those were great points of joy. And I think, again, here we go into community of sisters. Each one of us was a different decade. There were 4 of us. One was in her 80s, one was in her later 60s going on 70. I was in 40s going on 50. And then the youngest was, had turned 30 when I was down there. But we did so many things together, and we learned from each other, and we were all in a different school. There were 4 different schools. Santa Maria, I was the only one there of the sisters, and they hadn't had a sister for a long time. So it was great to be a sister there, not having had an MSc there for so many years. But then, the high school had someone, the primary had another sister. So we were we kind of reached and stretched, and we just shared that. We used to have, in Argentina, they don't eat until 9 o'clock at night. Okay, so we had merienda around 5 when we finished we were partially finished with the second turn. There were 2 full schools, actually, the morning into early afternoon and afternoon into early evening. But again, it was that great time of sharing the stories. And they used to be so supportive of me because my kids were so much fun. I had a lot of Downs children, and I never thought I would enjoy, because I always worked with babies when I was working in the hospital. So just having teenagers, I said, oh, I don't think I'll be able to do that. But I was able to do that so easily because they were so loving. And the sisters grew to love them too. So it was like not just me doing it, but the other sisters sharing in that delight.
So you said there were some highlights, some. Is there one that really struck your heart? Is there something or that changed who you were, or that prompted you to make a change in yourself, do you think?
I think going back to the deaf community, I know that there was a sister there at Charities that had her 25th anniversary. And most of the people that I worked with were Latino and Latinas and deaf, So I learned a lot of different ways to communicate in Puerto Rican Sign Language, actually, and one little tidbit would be, a divorce would be here, but in, Puerto Rican Sign Language, it's taking the ring and throwing it away, so there were many things, with that, but the highlight, I never knew my grandparents, and there was an older couple that I became extremely, extremely close to. And I think because they were heads of organizations, I became very close to the community, the deaf community. And one of the highlights of my life was when I was talking to them and they were talking to me, and they were talking about hearing people this, hearing people that, hearing people this. And I just said, but I'm hearing. And they said to me, no, you have a deaf mind. It was like entering into a world and being accepted in that world so totally, because it just was so natural and normal for me. But you entered so many parts of their life. You helped to get an eviction overturned because some people were complaining that there was always the television blasting, taking nail polish, going into the apartment and showing, don't go past this. Just little interventions that were so simple that really caused people's differences. Hearing children of deaf people they speak in a different syntax than we do. Sign language is not signed English. It's not word for word English. It's a whole different syntax. And you have, for example, your whole syntax is within direction. So much of that is there. The teachers didn't understand why they spoke so funny. And when you go and tell them that it's not their first language, and then explain some of these things, all of a sudden the light bulb went on for these children. They just thought they were stupid, and it was just a heartbreak because the children were, such advocates for their parents, sometimes even going to a police station when they're 6 or 7. So that type of thing where I just felt that, the support of our sisters, always being part, understanding. For example, when I was working in a hospital, that all of a sudden there was a no therapist drug zone. Any therapist could have done my job at the hospital, but with the multiple family dwellers, not everyone could do that. I wasn't afraid. I was prudent, but I wasn't afraid. So going into the homes made a difference. So I felt it was always that point of seeing what is the will of God and what is the will of the community. So I think that is such an incredible part of our charism, disponibility, and then always seeking the will of God in all things. And that's Mother Cabrini in a nutshell in many ways.
Yes. Woo. My goodness, my goodness. What
So,
what do you think is your current ministry, or how would you define your current ministry?
excuse me.
How would you describe your current ministry?
It's been difficult for me because I was like one of the people that used to take public transportation. I was a public transportation queen, but I did have an injury a few years ago, and I've had several surgeries. And so it kind of cramps my style a little, you know. And but still being able to be the support. One of the people, the executive director of the Shrine, Julia Attaway, is really a dynamic person. And she reaches out to the sisters, like sometimes for stories or where to do these types of things. So I hear from Julia a lot, and I'm just so happy to be supportive in any way that I can. I do a lot of spirituality. I've been trained as a presenter for contemplative outreach. So even during the pandemic, I was able to network. And, you know, Zoom has its limitations, but it also has its great points. You know, certainly you're able to, I was able to reach out to my prayer group at the beginning. Then after a while, that, you know, that differed. But even staying in contact with contemplative outreach, which is a worldwide situation, my prayer group is in Dublin, Ireland. Every Monday, you know, so it's like interesting how this can broaden. From a sister point of view, one of our sisters that I still am close with, Juanita made her final vows, and it was in Guatemala, and I would have with my whole heart wanted to be there, but during the pandemic it wasn't. But we were able to see her whole ceremony, not with the greatest technology, but we were able to be there with her and, you know, just witness that whole thing. We have never seen, you know, in the past, usually the other sisters from some of the other countries, you know, make their final vows. So this was something new, and it was one of the upsides of the pandemic was that ability with technology to reach out a little bit more. So
If you thought about it, what do you think are the one or two greatest strengths of the Institute?
of the Institute,
Yeah.
hospitality. Okay, I think that it was hard during the pandemic not to have the freedom of people coming in and out, and a lot of the sisters don't get out, so that, you know, that frequently, except maybe for a doctor's appointment, and so therefore, you know, that became, you know, more limiting, and we really miss people. But hospitality, definitely, absolutely love of the Sacred Heart. That is the center of our life, you know, and also when I was younger, we used to think of ourselves sometimes as the Three Musketeers, you know, all for one and one for all kind of a thing, even when we were going through school, helping each other. It wasn't, am I going to get an A? How can we get everyone through, you know, especially like a chemistry course or something. So it was great. I mean, that camaraderie was wonderful. And I think that's hopefully warmth that comes from the heart of Jesus and comes from Mother Cabrini, you know. But I still go back to the stories because she told stories all the time. You know, here we go with Mother Cabrini again, but she always said, you know, work, work, we have eternity to rest. So I think it's always like looking at needs and even how we can be helpful here, you know, as a group prayers, I mean, are incredibly important, and people from all over the missions will call and ask us to pray. And we have Holy Hour in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and so there's just petitions. Our sisters, you can hear the current events and the petitions even during our prayers and at Mass. So it's always looking at that, particular point. I think also being up with the times, Mother Cabrini responded to things when there were lynchings of Italians in Louisiana. She responded to that. She went to the prisons where that was that need. I get calls all the time. Julia called me a few weeks ago, our executive director from the shrine, and said, Diane, look, there's somebody that is up for murder, and his father is a great person. It was really in self-defense. So we had the sisters praying, on his court date, his first trial date after, 2 years. So it's always listening for what the needs are that are coming through. That's what 2022 is bringing to us. And, I think a lot of the sisters and people in the missions do depend on us for prayer also. We can't put that down, So anyway, it's pretty hallmark. But not just to sit there, but then to respond. There's so many ways to respond, in terms of someone being on death row, and we hear that he hasn't had good representation. So then signing petitions, but it's hearing that. And I know that there's a few that we have right now. We're very aware of people in the United States on death row. Mother went to the prison. She went to the coal mines. Where are we needed? But that's why we need to have a certain amount of fluidity. There's some institutions, but then we need some amount of fluidity so that, so at least some of our sisters can respond to those needs. I think all of this, especially, some of the things I talked about with Needs of the World, have opened my heart to be more aware of who's right in front of me. Listening becomes key, because I see here in just being aware of our sisters here also. We're almost 20. We have two sisters from other provinces right now that are living with us. But to listen, what can we do in just helping, especially the younger sisters. That's where so much of our diversity is, and their gift to us. And it's like, don't miss what's right in front of you. So I think it opens my heart and opens my eyes. That's what it's done for me. I've become more alert. Wake up.
That's wonderful.
Awake.
Thanks. Thank you.